Hello everyone, this is Gospodarou. I am an architect and a black and white fine art photographer, and I would like to present you my latest image in the series Flowy Time. You can find me on julianagospodarou.com, also on my blog that is related to my site, on Facebook at facebook.com/julianagospodarou.photography, and on different other photography sites. The image that I will present you is called Aligning Paths. It is the fifth image in the series Flowy Time, a series that has won several awards in international professional photography competitions. And because many of you ask me about how I create my images, I would like to give you an insight into the creative process of this image. If you want to know more about how I create my images and what is behind what you see as a final image, I would suggest you to read the book From Basics to Fine Art, Black and White Photography that I have written together with Joel Chinchilar. The book is already a bestseller and has the best critiques from readers and everyone that reviewed it, and it will give you answers to many of the questions that you have related to black and white fine art photography. To come back to the series, Flowy Time is a series that is different from whatever I've done so far and generally different from the way that we are used to look at architecture. I'm using in this series a tool that is the blur that a tilt shift lens can create in an image when it is tilted. Why I work with this effect is because I want to create a different way of looking at architecture. Normally, we look at architecture and think about images being sharp, of volumes that are very clear and very well defined. My idea and my vision behind this series is to create a connection between parallel worlds, which are shown and recreated by the objects that I use in my photographs. So by blurring the edges of these objects, I'm able to make a connection between these two worlds and open some gates that will give the possibility for these objects to communicate with each other, which is something that is not happening in reality, because two volumes in architecture, two volumes that are so immobile, will not be able to communicate with each other. By blurring the edges of these images, it's like allowing them to come together and to have a dialogue with each other in a more direct way. So this is the idea that stood behind this series, and the idea to create this kind of effect in my images was not new. I wanted to do something like this even before having access to the tools, which is a tilt shift lens. The moment that I started working with a tilt shift lens, this was one of the first things that I wanted to realize in my work, to realize a series where I could blur the edges of my volumes. And this is something new in the way of looking, a normal way of looking at architecture, because normally the tilt shift lens is used to create sharpness, more sharpness, and to create parallel verticals, which is why it's so used in architecture, but not so much to create blur, which is the opposite. What you know probably about creating blur with a tilt shift blur is the so-called miniature images, which is a technique that is more playful. So I'm seeing and I'm working with this tool in a totally different way that it was used before. And this is because I want to recreate a different world, which is the world that I have in my mind, my vision. So the idea of this series is to make parallel worlds come in contact and communicate with each other. And you will see this in all the images in this series from the first to the last one. You can see this on my site, or maybe you're already familiar with them. So now that we talked about the vision behind this series and you know a few things about it, let me start going into the process of creating these images more in the practical side of these images. And I will talk to you about a little bit about the compositional side and also about the processing part of the image. What I would like to say about generally about the process of creating an image is that it has a few steps. You start with an idea, you start with a vision, and then this vision has to be recreated in a physical object, which is the photograph that you create. So you have to find the best way to put this idea into an image. The first step that you have to do is to find a good composition. And to create a good composition, you do this in two steps: by capturing a very good composition on site, and then by helping this composition by either cropping it or rotating it or doing things like this to help it and to make it become even better. In this case, I didn't do too much because I saw this image and I was fascinated by this, the angle of these two buildings, the way that they were communicating with each other, the way that I could bring them together, and the way that I could bring together two totally different buildings. These buildings are, one of them is created by round shapes, the Trump Tower, and the other one, the IBM Plaza building, is a building created by flat shapes, and it's like a cube, a parallelepiped. These two buildings are two very well-known buildings and highlights of Chicago. The one is the Trump Tower, which is one of the highest buildings in the city, and it was designed by Adrian Smith. And the other one is designed by a very famous architect, Miss Van der Rohe, and it's a very dark building and a very impressive building. So I wanted these two totally different buildings to come together. And if you will see, if you look at my series Fluid Time, you'll see that the buildings that are subjects in this series are always different. Either there are two of them or more of them, but mostly two of them. You'll see that there are two words that are coming together. One of the images is also called Two Words. And you will see that there is a story in this series, and it has, I will try to elaborate about this in a new video or on my blog. If you're following me on my blog, you can read more about this and also watch a previous video that I've done about the previous image in this series, Stopping Time. Let me tell you a few things about the composition of this image. Composition is one of the most important things that you have to think about when you shoot, when you create any visual image, not only photography, whatever it is, if it's painting, it's architecture, if it's a sculpture, if it's everything. Because this is a tool that we are using to communicate something that has to be harmonious. So the composition of this image was created. If you look at this image, you will see that it was created as in a rule of thirds. You have one intersection, one important intersection in this area. So which area is around the first third of this image, and everything revolves around this part. This is the most important part of the image. It's the culmination of the image. So this is one of the things that you can find in this image. Another thing that you can find in this image are the leading lines. You have many leading lines pointing to this point. So this, again, a very important side of the image. Also, if you look at this, this image is created around a diagonal. This one diagonal is very important, and another half diagonal that is very important, which is one of the things that you can use in your compositions for creating a very powerful image. This is a half diagonal. This is actually a rule that I created myself. You won't find this in any book or any study of composition, intersecting two diagonals, one full diagonal and one half diagonal. And this is a very powerful way of working with your images. So these are a few things about the composition of this image. And another thing that you have to keep in mind when working on an image is that whatever you compose has to be sustained by the way that you work with light. So light is going to be a second part of your composition. It's going to enhance your composition and not come in conflict with it. Always have this thing in mind. So let's clear the image and go back to this. So we talked about the composition. The next part will be to talk about how I process this image in a few words. I will tell you my general way of working with images of this kind. I won't go into very much detail because this would make this tutorial a very long one, but I will go into much more detail in a further tutorial that I will create if you are interested in it. So let me start by telling you that my processing method is called photography drawing. For those that have come to a workshop with me, or my mentoring students, or the people that know me, about my work and the way I'm processing my images, you may be familiar with this concept. Also, the ones that read the book from Basics to Fine Art know a lot more about this. So photography drawing is a way of working with light in an image. It's based on the rules of working with light in a drawing. When you draw and you work with a pencil, it's not so much about working in a black and white drawing, but this is something that is very close to the way that we would process in a black and white image. But the rules are the same, and they are used generally in drawing and also in painting and working with other visual ways of communicating. Because I'm very familiar with drawing, I was drawing for a long time, and I'm using drawing in my professional, so it's not that I was creating artistic drawings, but I was also creating professional drawings. So this is a technique that is very familiar to me, and I was using it for a long time before working so extensively with computers, so I'm familiar with it. And the moment that computers came into play, I had to find a way to use my knowledge from before and recreate it in a way that was totally different, but I wanted to keep the basis that I had. So the basis I had and I worked with are the ones that you will see in the book From Basics to Fine Art. I will tell you a few things about them now, and we will probably talk later in a more extensive tutorial about everything, so you can understand in detail how I do and what I do in my images. The first idea behind this way of processing is that you have to process your image selecting different surfaces and working on them differently. And why this is happening is because light is behaving differently on different parts of the image. You can see that this image it doesn't have a flat light in any place that you would go and look. There's no flat light. Why you can find any surface of the image that is you can find flat light, it's because light is not behaving in the same way when it hits a surface. It's always different. There are many reasons for this. I won't go into detail here, but you can see in this image that this image is worked differently, and the way that I'm working with the image, the main tools that I'm using when working in this way with my images are the selections, so I can work separately in different parts of the image, and also different tools related with light, which are the gradients, the dodge and burn, sometimes brushes, and different other tools that I can work with on certain surfaces, not so much working with tools that would transform the image in a general and in a total way, but the ones that can be used in certain areas of the image separately and in different ways. The way I'm doing this is, as you can see here, is by working with many selections. You can have a look on this selection panel and you will see that you can count quite a few selections made on this image, and this is one of the images that was an easy one as far as the selections were concerned. There are some other images, my students know about them because I'm talking about them frequently, but there are some images that have even 40, 60 and even more selections in them. Also, another important part in the way that I'm working with my images is to work with layers. To work with layers for many different reasons. I suppose the ones that are working with Photoshop know why you should work with layers, but one of the reasons is to keep the faces of your working, to keep them so you can retrieve them, so you can come back to them and find whatever you worked on and replace it or rework on it, to work in a non-destructive way. This is why you're working with layers, and to give yourself the possibility to the freedom to recreate some parts of the image if you want, and you see that they need to be recreated. So let's come back to the normal view and see. I want to show you first I want to show you this image, how it started and how it ended up, just a simple pass towards all the layer states that I have in the image. So let's close everything and start from scratch so we can see how this image evolved. Let's zoom in a little bit so you can see more. And this was the color image, the cropped image that I had started with. This is a still image, but to this image I added a sky that I shot with long exposure. There were not so many clouds there, so you won't see very much action in the sky, but I will overcome this and I will show you how, because sometimes you just don't have any clouds, but you may need the richness that you have in a long exposure image to give you the richness of the sky and of the colors and of the pixels. So that's where I aimed to, and why I worked with a composite image, which is the image that you are seeing here. You will see that I'm working in some cases I'm working with masks that are masking different parts of the image when I want to combine different parts of the image, when I want to recreate, when I want to retouch parts of the image. This is, for instance, I wanted to make a uniform surface because I didn't like these patches of light on my image, so I clone them out so everything is smoother and I can concentrate on the shapes themselves. So this is how this image evolved from first steps to the last steps, working with different intensities of light, merging images, retrieving from each part the part that I was interested in. You will see that at some point this surface is going to disappear and is going to be much lighter because I couldn't work with it in this way. And you will see that if we go on, these are all stages of my here is when I brought everything together, which is one of the idea that I'm working with is to start from a very neutral base. And why I'm doing this? Because I want everything that I'm creating to be my creation and not take so much from the image that I'm working with from the raw image, which is only my basis. I'm applying my vision on this image, and I'm applying my vision by working with light and adding and removing light from a basis that I have to have as a neutral basis. So here I'm darkening the sky, and I'm starting to recreate what I didn't have in either in the still or in the long exposure image that I worked with. I used for creating this image. This is how I started working with light on my images. You can see all these things have been created by working with selections. You can have here, let me show you how my selection look. If I click on them, you will see that how they are changing, and because this is a tilt shift image, so I have quite a few blurred surfaces. I needed to blur also my selections because otherwise there would have been no way that I could render all these images. So these are my selections, and as I was saying in the beginning, this is a very simple case, not a very complex case of selections, but still they are quite a few, and I couldn't have worked on this image without them. So you can see how this image evolves, and with me working with light, working with adding or removing light, creating different scenarios that were changing, and were going towards the final image that was this one. So this is the last image. Let's have another look over how this image evolved, and in a more quick way, so you just get the film of this evolution in a fast forward way, so you understand this was the work of many hours and of many days, but you can see how it evolved like this by looking at my layers. And have in mind that every one of these layers, also of the selections, has a different name that has a sense for me, has a meaning, so I can understand which layers I did what and why. So this is an overview over this image, and I think I gave you a few insights, a few ideas about how I work without being too overwhelming in this phase. But I promise you that I will get into detail about everything, and if you want to know more, you can send me your questions, and I will keep them in mind and answer them in the next tutorial and also on my blog. For more details about this image and generally about my images, the way I'm working with them, as I told you, you can read the book From Basics to Fine Art that I wrote with Joel Chinchilla. Also, you can find some tutorials on my blog and on my site. So see you there, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.